I am Emily Martinez, a veteran whose life has been a tapestry of duty, loss, and unexpected turns. I was once a decorated combat medic, a staff sergeant who had saved lives in Afghanistan. But now, on this cold New York morning in 2025, I find myself huddled on a frigid street corner near Trump Tower, barely clinging to the remnants of who I used to be. I remember the warmth of camaraderie, the sound of orders echoing over dusty battlefields, and the soothing lull of a Spanish lullaby that once kept a wounded soldier alive in the midst of chaos. Now, all I have is this worn military jacket, a tattered sleeping bag, and the weight of memories too heavy to forget. It all began at the most unexpected moment, a moment that shattered the monotony of survival on the streets and thrust me into a maelstrom of attention and destiny. I was packing up my few belongings as the early morning wind whipped through the concrete canyons of the city when I sensed a shift in the air. The usual distant hum of delivery trucks and hurried footsteps was punctuated by the murmur of a growing crowd and the unmistakable flash of camera lights. I looked up and saw a figure emerging from Trump Tower, his dark suit and red tie contrasting sharply with the mundane bustle of the street. It was Donald Trump, and the moment he stepped away from his security detail, everything changed. My heart pounded in my chest as I recalled those long, harrowing days in Afghanistan, the burning Humvee, the deafening explosion, the frantic rush through gunfire, and that desperate, soothing melody I had sung to keep a young soldier conscious. I had been running on sheer instinct then, a survival routine honed by the horrors of war. Now here on this icy corner, that same instinct surged within me as Trump strode purposefully toward my makeshift refuge. I could see the intensity in his eyes as he moved, and I felt the weight of every life I had touched, every debt that had never been repaid. "Emily," his voice rumbled, surprisingly soft yet laden with an urgency I could not ignore. "Do you remember Afghanistan? Do you remember the lullaby?" His words pierced through the cacophony of snapping cameras and murmuring onlookers. In that moment, I felt exposed. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night flooding back with relentless clarity. I had always believed that my past was a secret locked away in the recesses of my mind, a burden too painful to share. Yet here was a man who seemed to know it all, who knew the precise details of that day when I had risked everything to save a life. As he stepped closer, the crowd around us seemed to fall away, and I could almost hear the distant echo of explosions and the frantic cries of fallen comrades. I did what I had to do," I stammered, my voice trembling as much from the cold as from the sudden surge of emotions. "I never thought anyone would remember." Trump's gaze softened for a fleeting second, and then his attention shifted. "My nephew, Mark, he owes you his life," he continued, his tone both accusatory and admiring. "He's been searching for you for years. I received a message. He said, 'Uncle Donald, I finally found her, the medic who saved my life.' And I remembered that photograph, the one I saw yesterday, of you in that military jacket." I felt a lump form in my throat as the enormity of his words sank in. Memories of Afghanistan mingled with the bitter reality of my current existence. I had become invisible on these streets, a ghost wandering amidst the indifferent rush of city life. Yet here was a chance to reclaim something of my past, to find meaning in the midst of chaos. As Trump spoke, a well-dressed woman stepped forward from the gathering crowd. Her eyes, bright with empathy, met mine. "Emily, I know what you've been through," she said softly, offering a small business card. "My brother served in Afghanistan too. Please call Jenny at Vet Connect Foundation. They help veterans like you find housing and new opportunities." Her voice carried the promise of hope, a chance at redemption that I had long thought impossible. I tucked the card carefully into the inside pocket of my jacket, as if preserving a fragile lifeline. The wind stung my face, but it also carried with it a strange warmth, the warmth of recognition, of validation. I was more than a homeless veteran. I was someone who had once saved lives, who had once been needed. Trump's security team, who had been hovering at a respectful distance, suddenly surged forward as if sensing that something monumental was unfolding. One of the guards muttered, "Mr. Trump, we need to secure the area." but Trump waved him off with a determined shake of his head. "This isn't a routine press conference," he declared. "It's a moment to repay a debt that can never be fully repaid." His eyes, though steely and unyielding, betrayed a hint of vulnerability, a recognition of the cost of a life spent in service. I stood there, frozen between disbelief and a cautious flicker of hope. Every instinct in me screamed to retreat, to disappear into the anonymity of the cold urban sprawl. But something in Trump's unwavering gaze and in the murmurs of the crowd made me pause. I remembered the feeling of camaraderie in the battlefield, the trust of a young soldier who looked to me for survival. I remembered that I was a fighter, one who had faced death and despair head-on, and yet here I was, still standing. "Emily," Trump said again, his voice softening as he stepped even closer, "I know you may not want help, but you don't have to do this alone anymore. Let us help you, the way you helped Mark. Let us honor what you did back then." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of years of unspoken truths. At that moment, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. There was fear, raw and palpable, mingled with a yearning to be seen, to be recognized for who I truly was. The bustling noise of the city, the snapping of cameras, and the anxious whispers of bystanders all faded into a distant hum as I focused solely on the man before me and the memories that bound us. "I've been invisible for so long," I admitted in a whisper, barely audible over the din of the crowd. "I used to be a medic, a protector. I saved lives, but I lost myself in the process." My voice cracked, the admission carrying the weight of years of silent suffering. "I thought I had nothing left. But then you reminded me of who I was." Trump nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Sometimes, Emily, life gives you a second chance to do the right thing. My nephew Mark, he's not just a soldier, he's a man who has been haunted by the ghosts of that day. He needs to thank the person who kept him alive. And maybe through you, we can help others too." His voice held a conviction that resonated deep within me, a promise of redemption, not just for Mark, but for every veteran who had been forgotten by a system that was too slow to heal its own wounds. I glanced around at the faces in the crowd, some filled with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with genuine empathy. There was a veteran in a tattered cap who looked at me with a knowing sadness, and a young man with bright eyes who seemed to wonder if hope could still be found amidst the ruins of broken promises. Even the cold, indifferent buildings of New York seemed to lean in, as if listening to the unfolding drama. "I never asked for this," I murmured, more to myself than to anyone else. "I never wanted to be the symbol of something greater than my own pain. But if my story can help even one person, if it can bridge the gap between survival and hope, then maybe it's worth it." The words, though spoken softly, carried a fierce determination, a resolve born of years of battling both external enemies and the internal demons that had once threatened to consume me. In that charged moment, as Trump's security team began to clear a path toward the imposing doors of Trump Tower, I felt the past and present collide in a surge of adrenaline and bittersweet longing. I remembered the burning heat of Afghanistan, the relentless march of time that had led me to these cold streets, and the fragile promise of a future that still glimmered in the darkness. "Come with me," Trump said, extending his hand in a gesture that was both commanding and gentle. "Let's go inside, where we can talk, where you can tell your story on your own terms." His eyes, a mix of determination and quiet compassion, searched mine for an answer. I hesitated, my mind a whirlwind of memories and emotions. The thought of stepping into that gleaming lobby, surrounded by marble floors and gold accents, felt surreal, a stark contrast to the gritty reality of my existence. But the promise of change, of reclaiming a piece of myself that I had long thought lost, was too compelling to ignore. "All right," I whispered, my voice steadier now as I reached out to take his hand. "I'll go with you." The simple words held a universe of meaning, a pledge to confront the ghosts of my past, to find redemption, and perhaps to finally reclaim the life that had once defined me. As we walked toward the entrance, the cameras continued to flash, capturing every step of this unlikely reunion. Behind us, the bustling crowd melted into a blur of faces and opinions, each one a silent witness to the turning point of my journey. I could feel the eyes of the world upon me, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel something other than fear and resignation, a cautious hope, a fragile yet undeniable. Inside, the lobby of Trump Tower was a world away from the cold streets outside. The polished floors and grand decor contrasted sharply with the grit and decay that had become my daily reality. Here I was no longer just a homeless veteran. I was a living testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there can be a spark of light. As we entered a quieter area away from the prying eyes and intrusive cameras, Trump led me into a spacious lounge where a few individuals waited. Among them was Mark Trump, a young man whose eyes held the same haunted look I remembered from the stories, and whose presence seemed to fill the room with both hope and sorrow. His expression softened when he saw me, and for a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the beating of our hearts. "Emily," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion as he approached. "I've dreamed of this moment for so long. I never thought I would find you again." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within me. I could see in his eyes the gratitude of a life saved, a debt that had weighed on him for years. "I saved your life," I replied softly, "but it feels like I've lost so much in return." My admission was raw, vulnerable, a confession of the sacrifices I had made and the price I had paid. I was the one who fought through the chaos, who sang that lullaby in the midst of destruction. I never imagined that one day, that moment would come back to define me. Mark reached out, taking my hand in his. "Your story's not just about the past, Emily. It's about the strength to keep fighting, even when everything seems lost. I want the world to know that there is hope, that there is a way forward, even for those of us who have been forgotten." His words, filled with earnest conviction, stirred something deep within me. A recognition that perhaps, through sharing my story, I could help others find their own path to healing. Trump, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward again. "We have an opportunity here," he said, his tone both firm and encouraging. "We're launching a nationwide program to provide immediate mental health care and support for veterans, a program that cuts through the red tape and bureaucracy. But we need voices like yours, Emily, voices that can speak from experience and remind us all of what truly matters." His gaze swept over the room, taking in the faces of those who had gathered. Veteran advocates, former colleagues, and even a few skeptical onlookers who had been drawn in by the spectacle. I felt a surge of emotions, pride, fear, and a profound sadness for all the years lost to silence and neglect. "I've been invisible for so long," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Every day I walk these streets, forgotten by a society that once hailed me as a hero. But maybe it's time for that to change." The words were an invocation of the past and a plea for a better future, a future where no veteran would be left to suffer alone. The room was silent for a heartbeat, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Then from somewhere in the back, a soft but steady clapping began. One by one, voices joined in, creating a quiet chorus of support that grew louder with each passing moment. Even the cold, unyielding walls of Trump Tower seemed to echo the sound of hope. I closed my eyes, letting the memories of Afghanistan wash over me. The relentless heat of battle, the desperate cries for help, the quiet moments of camaraderie that had kept me going through the darkest hours. And in that moment, I realized that every hardship, every sleepless night, and every pang of regret had led me to this very point. I was not defined by the scars on my body or the weight of my past, but by the strength I found in surviving it all. "I'll do it," I said, opening my eyes to meet Mark's and Trump's gaze. "I'll share my story, not for pity, but so that others can see that there is always a way back." My voice, though soft, carried a determination that resonated through the room. Trump smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to erase the years of cynicism etched into his features. "That's the spirit, Emily. Sometimes the longest road home begins with a single step." His words were both an acknowledgement of the past and a promise for the future. A promise that even the most broken among us can find redemption. As we sat together in that quiet lounge, the chaos of the outside world faded into a distant memory. I could still hear the murmur of protesters and the flash of cameras through the thick glass windows. But here, in this moment, there was only understanding, empathy, and the unspoken bond of those who had lived through the unthinkable. Every detail of that morning, the bitter cold, the blinding flashes, the raw emotion in every word, became a part of a larger narrative, one that spoke of loss and survival, of debts repaid and futures reclaimed. I thought back to the lullaby I had once sung in the heat of battle, the gentle, soothing melody that had given strength to a dying soldier. That lullaby, passed down through my mother, had been my anchor in the storm of war. And now it was returning to me, not as a relic of the past, but as a beacon of hope for the future. I could almost hear its soft strains echoing in the recesses of my mind, a reminder that even in the midst of despair, there was beauty to be found, and a reason to keep fighting. Mark leaned forward, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Emily, your strength has always been an inspiration, even when you couldn't see it yourself. You saved lives then, and now you have the chance to save many more. His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, dispelling the chill of loneliness that had haunted me for so long. In that fragile moment, I felt the barriers of my past begin to crumble. I remembered the long nights spent wandering the streets, the taste of bitter cold and hunger, the relentless feeling of being unseen. But I also remembered the moments of quiet defiance, the times when, despite everything, I had found a reason to stand tall. And now, as I sat here surrounded by people who believed in me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, my story could light the way for others. Trump's voice broke through my reverie. We're planning a press conference shortly, but for now, let's take a moment to speak from the heart. Emily, tell us, what does it mean to you to finally have this chance to come forward? His question was gentle, inviting me to share the raw, unfiltered truth of my journey. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of both fear and hope, and began to speak. I've spent so many years in the shadows, feeling like I was nothing more than a ghost haunting these streets. I was once a medic, a guardian in the chaos of war. But when I returned home, I found myself lost in a system that forgot about the sacrifices made on distant battlefields. I became invisible, a symbol of a broken promise, a promise that no veteran should ever have to break. My voice wavered as I recounted the countless nights spent alone, the despair that crept in with every passing day. But today I stand before you not as a victim of my past, but as a survivor who refuses to let that past define her future. I am here to reclaim my identity, to show that even when everything seems lost, there is still a spark of hope that can ignite a new beginning. The room was filled with a hush of reverence, each person absorbing the depth of my confession. In that moment, I knew that my words carried the power to change lives. Not just mine, but the lives of every veteran who had ever felt forgotten, every soul who had ever wandered in search of a place to call home. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the group, and I felt a surge of determination. I was ready to embrace the future, to step out of the shadows and into the light of a new day. As Trump, Mark, and the others offered their silent support, I realized that this chance encounter was more than just a meeting. It was the beginning of a revolution, a turning point in the way we all viewed sacrifice, honor, and redemption. I remember that moment as if it were etched into every fiber of my being. The moment I stepped up to the podium at the press conference, my heart pounding so fiercely I feared it would burst through my ribcage. The room was filled with a buzzing anticipation, a mix of reporters clamoring for a soundbite and genuine onlookers who sensed that something raw and transformative was unfolding. I could feel the weight of every gaze upon me, and for a brief second, the memories of Afghanistan, of burning deserts and shattered hopes, threatened to overwhelm me. Yet beneath that storm of emotions, a quiet resolve had taken root, a determination to reclaim my identity and to speak not just for myself, but for every veteran who had ever been forgotten. As I began to speak, my voice wavered at first, soft and tentative, but then I found the cadence of that long-ago lullaby humming in my veins. I was once a medic, I said, my words slow and deliberate, A guardian on a battlefield where every second counted and every life was a precious thread in the tapestry of our shared humanity. I paused, searching the sea of faces for understanding, and I saw not pity, but a spark of recognition, a silent promise that the truth I carried was needed. When I returned home, I was left alone in a system that couldn't keep pace with the scars of war. I became invisible on these cold streets, a ghost among the living. But I refused to be defined by that neglect any longer. The room fell into a reverent hush, the murmurs of agreement echoing softly like the distant hum of a well-worn engine. I could still feel the chill of the early New York morning, but now it was tempered by an inner warmth, a flame of defiance burning steadily against the encroaching darkness. I recalled the tender notes of the Spanish lullaby my mother once sang, a lullaby that had steadied my hands and given me the strength to push through the chaos of a burning Humvee. That melody, carried on the winds of memory, was a reminder that even in the midst of devastation, there could be moments of solace, moments of human connection. As I continued, Mark leaned forward, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. His presence was a silent testimony to the debt that had bound our fates together, a debt not measured in dollars or accolades, but in the intangible currency of life and sacrifice. When I was a young soldier, barely clinging to life, I confessed, I heard a voice that promised me hope, that told me to keep fighting even when everything seemed lost. I didn't know it then, but that voice was a lifeline. Today I stand before you, not as a victim of my past, but as a survivor ready to rebuild a future for us all. Trump's eyes, which had earlier been cold and calculating, now shone with something like empathy. His hand rested on the table as he interjected softly. Every veteran has a story that deserves to be heard. Emily, your journey is not just about pain and loss. It's about resilience, redemption, and the unwavering spirit to rise again. His words, unexpected in their tenderness, resonated in the charged air of the room. The press conference was more than a staged event that day. It was a crucible in which our shared histories were being laid bare. Reporters peppered us with questions, their voices overlapping in a cacophony that threatened to drown out the fragile truth we were trying to articulate. One reporter demanded, "How can you reconcile the heroism of your actions in Afghanistan with your current struggles on the streets?" Another asked, "What does this new initiative mean for the thousands of veterans still waiting for help?" Each question was a probe into the depths of my soul, and I realized that every word I spoke carried the burden of not just my own story, but of a collective pain that had been hidden away for too long. I took a deep breath and responded, "My life has been a series of battles. Some fought on distant, scorching battlefields, and others fought right here, against a system that forgot us when we needed it most. Every scar, every sleepless night, is a reminder of the sacrifices we made and the promises that were left unfulfilled. But today, I am not asking for pity. I am asking for change. I want every veteran to know that they are seen, that their struggles matter, and that together we can forge a new path, a path where no one is left behind." The room seemed to hold its breath at that, the silence punctuated only by the soft whir of cameras and the faint rustle of shifting papers. I could feel the energy in the room shifting, as if the very air had thickened with possibility. In that moment, the boundaries between past and present, between pain and hope, blurred until they were indistinguishable from one another. I was no longer just Emily Martinez, the homeless veteran who had once been invisible. I was a beacon for all those who had been lost in the shadows of neglect. Mark reached out, his hand warm and steady as it clasped mine. "Emily," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion, "your courage has lit a fire in me that I thought was long extinguished. You gave me hope when I had none, and now I want to give that hope to others. We have an opportunity to change lives, yours, mine, and that of every veteran who has felt abandoned." His words, simple yet profound, enveloped me in a cocoon of reassurance, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future waiting on the other side of this darkness. Trump leaned in, his tone firm but gentle. "We are about to launch a nationwide program that will provide immediate mental health care and support for veterans. A program that bypasses the endless red tape and bureaucracy that have left so many of you in the cold. But for this to work, we need voices like yours. Voices that speak from the heart, that share the unvarnished truth of what it means to serve and to struggle. His gaze swept across the room, pausing on faces that mirrored both hope and hardship. The veterans, the advocates, the ordinary citizens who had come to bear witness. As I looked around at those faces, I felt a profound sense of connection, a shared understanding that transcended words. I thought back to the countless nights spent on the unforgiving streets, to the bitter loneliness that had once threatened to consume me. Now, standing before a crowd that cared, I realized that my scars were not symbols of defeat, but marks of survival, of battles fought and won against impossible odds. The questions from the press grew more numerous, each one a reminder of the complexity of our collective story. One reporter asked, "How do you plan to navigate the challenges of transitioning from life on the streets to a role in shaping veteran care?" Another queried, "What does this initiative mean for the future of mental health support for veterans nationwide?" I took a moment to gather my thoughts, my mind racing through memories of both pain and triumph. "Transitioning isn't about forgetting where you came from," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "It's about carrying the lessons of that past into the future. I won't deny that my journey has been marked by hardship, by moments of deep despair that seemed insurmountable. But those experiences have also taught me resilience. I learned on the streets that every day is a battle, and every small victory is worth celebrating. If my story can be the spark that lights a fire in others, if it can remind even one veteran that they are not alone, then every sacrifice, every moment of suffering has been worth it." In that moment, I could feel the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes upon me. The eyes of veterans who had once felt abandoned, of families who had struggled in silence, and of a society that was only now beginning to reckon with its forgotten heroes. The press conference had become a sanctuary for our shared pain and our collective hope, a place where the voices of the voiceless were finally being heard. As the conference drew to a close, Trump stepped forward once more, his voice resonating with a final, determined note. "Today we are not just launching a program," he said. "We are igniting a movement that honors the sacrifices of our veterans and ensures that no one is left to face their demons alone." Emily, your story is a testament to that promise, and I promise you, we will see this through. The applause that followed was thunderous, a mix of relief, validation, and a burgeoning hope that transcended the boundaries of our past struggles. I felt tears welling up, not from sorrow alone, but from the overwhelming realization that I was finally being seen, not as a broken soul, but as a survivor, a warrior with a story worth telling. As the room slowly emptied, leaving behind only the quiet murmur of lingering hope, I sat down for a moment to collect my thoughts. Outside, the city had transformed. The cold streets now buzzed with an energy that felt like the promise of a new beginning. I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, that the scars of the past would not simply vanish with a few heartfelt words. Yet for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to dream of a future where those scars could become the foundation for healing. A future where the darkness of neglect could be dispelled by the light of understanding and compassion. Walking out of that room later that evening, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the distant sounds of a city that was slowly waking up to the reality of its own contradictions. A city where the bright neon lights masked deep-seated inequalities and where the forgotten voices of veterans cried out for recognition. I knew that my journey was far from over. There would be more battles ahead, more moments of doubt and despair. But I also knew that I was no longer alone. As I stepped onto the busy sidewalk outside Trump Tower, the flickering reflections of streetlights danced across the pavement, mirroring the myriad possibilities that now stretched out before me. Each step I took was heavy with memories of pain, yet lightened by the newfound promise of change. I could hear distant voices, of protesters demanding accountability, of supporters chanting words of solidarity, and of strangers sharing smiles that spoke of hope. In that moment, I realized that my story was no longer just my own. It belonged to every veteran who had ever been overlooked, to every soul who had struggled in the shadows of society's indifference. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with both peril and promise. But as I walked down that familiar street, I held on to the knowledge that the past, with all its scars and sorrow, had led me to this very moment. A moment where the longest road home had finally begun to reveal its destination. And in the soft, persistent echo of that Spanish lullaby, I heard not the cries of a haunted past, but the gentle, steady heartbeat of a future waiting to be written. I sat in a quiet corner of my modest apartment that night, the distant hum of the city melding with the soft patter of rain against my window. I still felt the echoes of the day's events reverberating in my chest, each beat a reminder of battles fought both on distant, sun-scorched fields and on the cold, unforgiving streets of New York. In that solitude, I began to reflect on the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken me, the surge of hope intermingled with a lingering fear, the bittersweet nostalgia of memories that were both a source of strength and a wellspring of pain. The press conference, with its bright lights and probing questions, had been just the beginning. In the days that followed, my phone had become an incessant beacon of messages, some filled with words of gratitude from veterans who had long suffered in silence, others laced with skepticism and the bitterness of those who still doubted whether a homeless veteran could truly be a catalyst for change. Every notification was a reminder that while I was stepping into the light, the shadows of my past were never far behind. One crisp morning, as I was preparing a modest cup of coffee, I heard a gentle knock on my door. Opening it, I found a woman with kind eyes and a reassuring smile. She introduced herself as Rachel, a mental health counselor who had dedicated her life to helping veterans navigate the treacherous terrain of post-war trauma. "I've been following your journey, Emily," she said softly, her voice imbued with empathy. "I believe your story can help not just you, but so many others who feel lost." There was something in her tone, a genuine warmth, that made me lower my guard, even if, just for a moment. Over the next few weeks, Rachel became a steady presence in my life. We met regularly, sometimes in her cozy office filled with soft lighting and comforting mementos, other times during long walks in a nearby park where the autumn leaves danced in the cool breeze. During our sessions, I found myself peeling back layers of old wounds, speaking aloud memories I had long buried under the weight of survival. Rachel listened intently, never judging, always encouraging me to find the strength in vulnerability. "Your experiences are the threads that weave the fabric of who you are," she reminded me gently. "They don't define you, they empower you." As I continued to share my story at local gatherings and community meetings, I began to notice subtle changes in the way people responded. There was a growing ripple of understanding among my fellow veterans, a shared recognition that the hardships we endured were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger collective struggle. One evening after a particularly moving town hall meeting, I found myself surrounded by a small group of veterans. Among them was Tom, a gruff man with a weathered face who had served as an infantryman, and Lily, a soft-spoken former nurse whose eyes betrayed the pain of loss. They spoke in hushed tones about their own battles, of nights spent in overcrowded shelters, of family members who had given up on them, and of the bureaucratic indifference that had left them stranded. "Emily," Tom said, his voice rough with emotion, "you gave us a reason to believe that maybe things can change. I used to think we were all just forgotten ghosts, drifting in a system that doesn't care. But tonight, hearing you speak, it feels like someone finally sees us." Lily nodded in quiet agreement, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. In that moment, I realized that my journey was evolving into something much greater than my own healing. It was becoming a beacon for others, a call to action for a society that had long neglected its heroes. Amidst this growing network of support, there were still challenges to face. The media continued to cast long shadows over my every word, and the political undercurrents that had first thrust my story into the spotlight began to resurface. Critics questioned the authenticity of my past, insinuating that my rise from homelessness was merely a carefully orchestrated publicity stunt. These voices, though few, cut deep, reopening old wounds and making me doubt whether I was truly ready to expose every scar. I remember one particularly bitter evening when a heated online debate spiraled out of control. Anonymous users accusing me of embellishing my experiences, of using my pain for political gain. The digital venom stung, and for a night, I found myself retreating further into isolation, questioning whether the cost of speaking out was worth a perpetual invasion of my privacy. Yet, each time doubt crept in, I would hear Rachel's calm reminder in my mind. Your truth is yours alone, and no one can take that away. I clung to those words, finding solace in the knowledge that my story, with all its raw edges and unvarnished moments, was a testament to a reality that many preferred to ignore. It was in these moments of introspection that I began to write again. Long, sprawling entries in a leather-bound journal that became a trusted confidant. I wrote of the long, lonely nights on the streets, of the numbing cold and the piercing isolation, but also of the quiet, almost imperceptible moments of kindness. A shared smile from a stranger, the warmth of a donated blanket, the unexpected call from a friend. One day, as I was writing by the light of a flickering desk lamp, my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice, warm and steady as always, filled me with a sense of purpose. "Emily," he said, "we need to talk. There's something important I want to share with you." His tone carried an urgency that I couldn't ignore. I agreed to meet him at a small diner on the edge of the city, a place that, despite its modest appearance, held memories of better times and hopeful beginnings. Sitting across from Mark, I could see the weariness in his eyes, a mirror of my own. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Emily, ever since that press conference, I've been working with a group of veterans and community leaders to build a platform, a foundation that goes beyond just mental health care. It's about creating a network where every veteran can find support, whether it's housing, medical care, or simply someone who understands. We've started small, but the momentum is growing." His words were filled with a determined optimism that sparked a light in the dim recesses of my heart. "I've been thinking," Mark continued, "about how many of us have been pushed to the margins, forgotten by a system that was supposed to protect us. I know it sounds idealistic, but I believe that if we pool our resources, if we really stand together, we can change things for the better." His eyes searched mine, looking for a sign of shared conviction. In that moment, I felt the weight of my own story transform from a burden into a rallying cry, a call for collective healing and solidarity. "I want to help," I said quietly, "not just for myself, but for every veteran who has ever felt invisible. If my pain can pave the way for change, then every tear, every sleepless night will have been worth it." Mark smiled, a gentle, reassuring curve that spoke of shared dreams and the promise of a brighter future. As our conversation unfolded, the diner's neon lights flickered outside the window, casting a soft glow on our hopeful faces. I thought about the long road that had brought me here, from the ravaged battlefields of Afghanistan to the unforgiving streets of New York, and now to a crossroads where the past and the future converged in a moment of possibility. Each word from Mark, each shared memory, was a step towards reclaiming a sense of belonging that had been denied to so many of us. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, the movement began to take tangible shape. Community centers opened their doors to veterans, offering not just shelter and food, but also counseling, job training, and creative outlets for self-expression. Local businesses, moved by the raw authenticity of our stories, started offering support, whether through donations, job opportunities, or simply a kind word. The media, once quick to reduce our narratives to fleeting sound bites, began to document the stories of our collective struggle with a newfound sensitivity. I was invited to participate in a series of workshops where I shared my journey through art, poetry, and candid conversations. In one such session, held in a sunlit room at a community center, I read aloud a poem I had written during one of my darkest nights. The words flowed from me like a river of raw emotion, a tapestry of pain, hope, and a defiant will to survive. As I spoke, I could see tears glistening on the faces of those gathered, and in that shared vulnerability, there was a profound sense of unity. We were all survivors, bound together by our scars and our dreams of a future where no one would be left behind. Yet, amidst all the progress, there were still moments when the ghosts of the past crept in uninvited. On sleepless nights, I would lie awake, the silence of my apartment broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the relentless echo of memories. I would see flashes of the Afghanistan desert, the searing heat, the acrid smell of burning fuel, the anguished cries of comrades lost in battle. And for a fleeting moment, the walls I had built around my heart would tremble. It was during these times that I would listen to the soft strains of the Spanish lullaby, letting its gentle melody soothe the turbulent storm within. It was a ritual, a quiet affirmation that even in the darkest hours, there was a promise of dawn. One evening, as a cold rain drizzled outside, I received an unexpected visit from an old friend, James, a fellow medic who had served with me in Afghanistan. His presence stirred a maelstrom of emotions, nostalgia, sorrow, and a deep-seated pride in the brotherhood we once shared. We sat together in my living room, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls as we reminisced about days long past. "I've heard so much about you, Emily," James said, his voice tinged with both admiration and regret. "I never imagined that the one who saved lives on the battlefield would end up here, fighting a different kind of war." His words, though meant as a gentle tease, cut deep, reminding me of the stark contrast between who I once was and who I had become. Yet as we talked, I realized that our journeys, no matter how divergent, were bound by the same unyielding desire to survive, to find meaning in the aftermath of chaos. James shared stories of his own struggles, the quiet despair of losing comrades, the relentless battle against post-traumatic stress, and the challenge of reintegrating into a world that seemed indifferent to the scars of war. In his eyes, I saw a reflection of my own pain, and in that unspoken bond, there was a mutual understanding that words could hardly capture. "We carry these memories with us," James murmured, "but maybe, just maybe, we can transform them into something beautiful, a legacy of resilience and hope." His words lingered in the air long after he had left, mingling with the soft hum of the rain and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I realized that every encounter, every conversation, was a stitch in the fabric of a new narrative, one where our shared experiences became the foundation for a future that embraced both the light and the shadows of our past. As I looked out the window that night, watching the city breathe under the gentle caress of rain, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected twists that had led me here. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. Yet with each step I took, I carried with me the knowledge that I was no longer alone, that my story, our story, was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. In the soft glow of the early morning light, I promised myself that I would continue to fight, not just for the recognition I once craved, but for every soul who had ever been forgotten. The past, with all its pain and beauty, would not be a chain to bind me, but a wellspring of strength from which I could draw the courage to shape a brighter tomorrow. I stepped into the cool night with a heart that, though scarred, beat with a new rhythm, a blend of old pain and burgeoning hope. The streets of New York, once indifferent and cold, now pulsed with possibility as I walked alongside others who shared my burden. Each step carried the echoes of a past that had once nearly broken me, yet also whispered of a future that was slowly coming into focus. That evening, I attended a community gathering at a small renovated warehouse, a space transformed into a haven for veterans and activists. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh coffee and the soft murmur of conversations, punctuated by bursts of laughter and shared stories. I found a seat among a diverse group of people, some with faces etched by years of hardship, others with eyes still shining with a quiet defiance. Here we were all united by our struggles, our hopes, and a collective determination to rewrite our narratives. I remember the moment vividly. A young veteran named Dylan, whose voice trembled with a mixture of anger and sorrow, stood up to speak. "We've been treated like disposable parts in a machine that doesn't care about our sacrifices," he said, his words resonating in the charged silence. "But tonight, we stand together, and that unity is something no one can take away." His words stirred something deep inside me, They reminded me that the fight for recognition was not just about individual survival, but about the dignity of every soul who had been forgotten. As the meeting went on, I shared parts of my journey, my time in Afghanistan, the moment I sang that Spanish lullaby to a wounded soldier, and the long, lonely nights on the streets of New York. My voice wavered as I recounted the most painful memories, yet it also grew stronger with each word, buoyed by the support and understanding that filled the room. I saw nods of empathy, felt gentle squeezes on my hand, and even heard soft, approving murmurs. In that space, my vulnerability was not a sign of weakness, but a powerful reminder of our shared humanity. After the meeting, I lingered outside in the cool night air with Rachel, who had become both a guide and a friend. She looked at me with those kind eyes and said, "Emily, every time you speak your truth, you give others the courage to do the same. It's not just about healing yourself. It's about healing all of us." Her words, simple yet profound, reaffirmed the conviction that had been building within me since that fateful morning near Trump Tower. As the weeks turned into months, the movement began to gain momentum. Local news outlets started following our progress with a newfound respect, and stories of our community's efforts to support veterans spread beyond the borders of our neighborhood. I was invited to speak at town hall meetings, participate in panel discussions, and even sit down with policymakers who were finally beginning to listen. Every interaction was a delicate dance between the raw edges of my past and the hopeful promise of a better future. I also began to reconnect with old friends from my military days, those who had once fought beside me on the dusty roads of Afghanistan. One evening, I met with a small group of them at a quiet diner off the beaten path. We sat together, the clink of coffee cups punctuating our reminiscences as we shared stories of camaraderie and loss. There was a quiet understanding among us, an unspoken bond forged in the heat of battle and tempered by the long, hard road home. "I used to think that the battlefield was the only place where we mattered," one of my old comrades said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But seeing you now, seeing how you've turned your pain into something that can help others, it reminds me that our value isn't defined by our scars, but by our strength to overcome them." His words, like a balm to old wounds, filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Mark and I continued to work closely on the foundation. We spent countless hours drafting proposals, meeting with potential donors, and brainstorming innovative ways to bypass the red tape that had long strangled the support systems meant for veterans. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm us, when the enormity of the challenges ahead seemed insurmountable. Yet in those moments, I would close my eyes and recall the soft strains of that lullaby. Its gentle melody a reminder that even the most fractured pieces could come together to form something beautiful. One particularly memorable day, a large group of veterans and community supporters gathered at a local park for a rally, an event that symbolized the beginning of a new chapter. I stood on a makeshift stage under a clear blue sky, looking out at a sea of determined faces. In that moment, I felt every bit the medic I once was, not on a battlefield, but in a space where lives were being mended through the power of unity. As I spoke to the crowd, my voice carried not just my own story, but the collective struggles and triumphs of every veteran who had ever felt abandoned. "We are not defined by the scars of our past," I declared, "but by the courage it takes to rise above them. Together we can build a future where every one of us is seen, heard, and valued." The crowd erupted in applause. A resounding affirmation that echoed across the park, a promise that our voices would no longer be silenced in the weeks that followed. I continued to navigate the delicate balance between personal healing and public advocacy. The journey was far from linear. There were days of intense vulnerability when the weight of old memories threatened to pull me back into darkness. On such days, I would retreat into solitude, listening to the soft hum of the city at night and letting the memories wash over me without judgment. I learned to embrace the duality of my existence, the soldier who had faced unimaginable horrors and the woman who now dared to hope and rebuild. Each night, as I sat by my window watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, I felt a quiet gratitude for the unexpected turns my life had taken. I was no longer the invisible veteran who had once wandered the streets. I was a storyteller, a healer, a catalyst for change. And in every shared smile, every nod of understanding, I found the strength to keep moving forward. The foundation we had built was still in its infancy, but every small victory, each veteran finding shelter, every individual receiving the mental health support they desperately needed, was a testament to our resilience. I began to see my journey not as a series of isolated battles, but as part of a larger narrative, one that wove together the threads of pain, perseverance, and hope. As I continue this journey, I carry with me the memories of Afghanistan, the cold streets of New York, and every face that has reminded me that I am not alone. My scars tell a story of survival, of love, and of the unyielding will to forge a better tomorrow. And so, with every step I take into the uncertain night, I am guided by the soft, enduring melody of a lullaby that once kept a dying soldier alive, now transforming into the anthem of a movement that refuses to let anyone be forgotten. Trump Tower, press conference room, evening. I sat in the press conference room as the last vestiges of daylight faded outside, the space now bathed in a soft amber glow from the overhead lights. The murmur of conversations had dwindled into a respectful silence, each person present holding their breath for what would come next. I could feel the energy pulsing in the air, a mix of hope, determination, and the residual tension of a day that had changed everything. Trump stood at the front, his stern gaze scanning the room. His face, usually a mask of confidence, now betrayed hints of vulnerability. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Tonight marks a turning point," he said, his voice resonating through the quiet space. "We have witnessed the truth, the power of a single story to ignite change. Our actions here will echo far beyond these walls." His eyes briefly met mine, and in that silent exchange, I felt an affirmation of everything that had led us to this moment. Mark stood beside him, his presence calm and steady. "Our journey doesn't end here," he added, his voice soft, yet resolute. "It is only the beginning of a movement that will ensure every veteran is seen and every sacrifice remembered." I could sense the unity in his words, a pledge not just to me, but to every forgotten soul who had ever walked the cold streets in search of hope. I listened, my heart still pounding from the whirlwind of the day. In that moment, I thought back to the long nights of solitude, the biting cold, and the relentless echo of that Spanish lullaby that once kept a dying soldier alive. I remembered every scar, every tear shed in silence, and I realized that those wounds, once symbols of despair, had now become the foundation of a strength that could not be broken. Across the room, I noticed a subtle shift among the press. One of the political strategists, whose empty words had once sought to tarnish my truth, now sat hunched over, his expression a mix of regret and dismay. I later learned that his web of deceit had unraveled under the weight of undeniable facts, and his reputation was left in tatters. There was a bitter satisfaction in knowing that those who had tried to exploit our pain were now forced to confront the consequences of their own actions. As the room held its collective breath, I stepped forward and approached the microphone once more. My voice, though soft, carried the weight of every battle fought and every hope rekindled. Tonight, we stand united, not just as individuals with painful histories, but as a community that refuses to be defined by neglect or indifference, I said. Our scars tell a story of resilience and unwavering courage. They are not marks of shame, but reminders that even in our darkest hours, we can find the strength to rise again. I paused, looking out at the faces before me, faces filled with the quiet determination of those who had known suffering and yet dared to dream of a brighter tomorrow. I invite each of you to share your stories, to let your voices be heard. If my journey has touched your heart, join us in this movement for change together. We can build a future where every veteran is valued, every sacrifice honored, and no one is ever left behind. The room erupted into a gentle applause, a sound that mingled with the soft hum of the city outside. I felt a profound connection, a reassurance that the road ahead, though uncertain, was one we would walk together. In that moment, as the press conference came to a close and the echoes of our shared promise lingered in the air, I knew that this was not the end of my story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter. If you feel moved by this story, If you have your own experiences of struggle and triumph, please share them. Leave a comment, reach out, and let your voice join the chorus of those demanding that no veteran ever be forgotten. Together, our stories can light the way for a future built on hope, resilience, and true compassion. As I walked out into the cool evening after the town hall meeting, I felt a sense of calm determination settle over me. The cheers and words of encouragement still echoed in my mind, mingling with the soft sound of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves in the gentle wind. Behind me, I could hear whispers that the very people who had once ridiculed and dismissed my story were now facing the consequences of their own deceit. The political strategist who had spun false narratives about my past, the one who had scoffed at the idea that a homeless veteran could inspire real change, was now embroiled in scandal, his own missteps and manipulation laid bare for all to see. His fall from grace was a bitter vindication, a reminder that those who try to suppress the truth eventually suffer the weight of their own lies. I stand here now, not as a victim of a broken system, but as a survivor who has turned every scar into a lesson and every hardship into a stepping stone toward a brighter future. The journey from the battlefields of Afghanistan to the unforgiving streets of New York, and finally to this moment of collective healing and empowerment, has been long and fraught with pain. Yet it has also been filled with the discovery of resilience, the warmth of unexpected kindness, and the power of community coming together to demand dignity for every veteran. My scars tell the story of battles fought on distant, scorching deserts and on the cold, concrete sidewalks of a city that had once forgotten me. They speak of sleepless nights and moments when the darkness threatened to consume me. But they also remind me that even the deepest wounds can mend when touched by compassion and understanding. I have learned that vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a bridge that connects us to each other, a pathway to reclaiming the parts of ourselves that we once thought were lost forever. As I gaze into the night, the city lights flickering like distant stars, I know that this is not the end of my journey. There will be more challenges ahead, more nights when the past comes roaring back, and more obstacles to overcome in our fight for a system that honors every sacrifice. Yet in the uncertainty of tomorrow, there is also hope. Hope that our movement will continue to grow, that the voices of those once silenced will be heard, and that every veteran, every forgotten soul, will find a place where they are not only seen, but cherished. This story is a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of standing up for what is right. It teaches us that, even in the face of overwhelming adversity, our true strength lies in our ability to rise, to share our truth, and to turn our pain into a force for change. I invite you, dear reader, to reflect on your own battles, whether they be personal struggles, moments when you felt invisible, or times when the world seemed indifferent to your suffering. Share your experiences, your hopes, and your dreams in the comments below. Let's create a conversation where every voice matters and every story adds to the rich tapestry of resilience and renewal. Together, we can transform pain into progress and ensure that no one ever has to fight their demons alone.